The thing that came to mind this morning when it pertains to this series, have you ever heard of the hero's journey? So the hero's journey is this idea that like most hero stories have an underlying pattern to them, and it basically goes like this. There's an what's the right word? There's an unlikely hero. There's an unlikely hero who gets a divine calling to adventure, right? Think Frodo from Lord of the Rings, right? Or if you're a super nerd, Harry Potter, right? No offense. I'm just saying Frodo's better. And there is an unlikely hero who's given a divine calling to adventure. Now, what happens from there is that they end up getting a group around them of helpers, right? Of people who go on the journey with them. And then they start off on the journey, and during the journey, they experience trials and tribulations, and things get really hard, and they almost die, and it's this dramatic climax, and then they win. And after they win, there's this, usually in our movies it's short, but there's this time of restoration, redemption, atonement, and then they kind of take all of that goodness home with them and share it with the people who sent them off, right? That's a common thread in a lot of our stories, you know. That's a common thread in a lot of the ancient mythologies. It's a common thread in a lot of the stories we watch. It's any superhero movie you've ever watched. Lots of the movies, you know, it's like you kind of, if you sit down to watch a movie, you kind of know the pattern it's going to go in. Why? Because a lot of these movies are written based off of that hero's journey. And I think for good reason. Like, I think that compels us. And I think that compels us because God put that in us. Like, God put that in us. Like, you've probably all been in a place where, like, you just, you know, maybe you love your job, but like, even if you love your job, there's just days that it's soul sucking. You know what I'm talking about? Like you get there that morning and you're like, I don't even want to be here right now. And then somebody comes up to you and they say something, and they probably didn't say anything all that bad, but you're like, I don't want to see you right now. You know? And then there's problems, and it's a problem that maybe on a regular day wouldn't be a big deal, but on that day you're like, hey, I'm out. This is not going well, right? And it's because, like, we're made for more than, like, we're made for adventure. We're made to follow God into the unknown. We're made for so much more than the 9-to-5 life. Now, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. Y'all got to pay bills, right? Like, there are some practical sides of this. Like, and the Bible does says you don't work, you don't eat, right? And so we have to pay the bills. We have to do our thing. We have to provide for our families. We have to do all of that. That's true. But there's so much more than that. And so, you know, it could be that the call to adventure in your life, it has to do with when you get home, or it has to do with how you interact with people at work, or it has to do with other things, right? It could be that it means you need to get a different job. I don't know. All I'm saying is God called us to more than what we oftentimes just dwindle our life down to. You know, we talked, a couple weeks ago when we introduced Nehemiah. Like Nehemiah, this guy, he had a good setup. He had a good setup. He's safe. He works for the king. He's in good shape. He obviously he has the king's ear on some level or another. And like, he had a good setup. He was safe, and he could have kept doing the thing, but God moved on his heart to do something else and to go off. And so where we pick up today is the middle of chapter 2. We're going to start in verse 10, and we'll work our way down to the end of the chapter. So, verse 10. When Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah the Ammonite, what a great name, Sanballat. Anyway, and Tobiah the Ammonite heard of my arrival, they were very displeased that someone had come to help the people of Israel. So these are local leaders, right? And they don't want the competition. So I arrived in Jerusalem 3 days later. I slipped out during the night, taking only a few others with me. I had not told anyone about the plans God had put on my heart for Jerusalem. We took no pack animals with us, except the donkey I was riding. After dark, I went out through the valley gate, past the jackal's well, over to the dung gate. What a name for a gate. Something pooped there. That's extra biblical, but I'm just assuming. To inspect the broken walls and burned gates. Then I went to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but my donkey couldn't get through the rubble. So though it was still dark, I went up to the Kidron Valley instead, inspecting the wall before I turned back and entered again at the valley gate. The city officials did not know I had been out there or what I was doing, for I had not yet said anything to anyone about my plans. I had not yet spoken to the Jewish leaders, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or anyone else in the administration. But now I said to them, you know very well what trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace. Then I told them about how the gracious hand of God had been on me and about my conversation with the king. They replied at once, yes, let's rebuild the wall. So they began the good work. But when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab heard of our plan, they scoffed contemptuously. What are you doing? Are you rebelling against the king? They asked. I replied, the God of heaven will help us succeed. We, his servants, will start rebuilding this wall, but you have no share, legal right, or historic claim to Jerusalem. So, Nehemiah, in the beginning, Nehemiah gets the word that Jerusalem's laying in ruins and they got big problems. Then, what you covered last week, he meets with the king, and then he gets permission to go. And now he shows up in Jerusalem. When he shows up, immediately people don't want him there. Like immediately people don't want him there. You ever walked into a room you weren't wanted in? It's uncomfortable. Now, have you ever walked into a room you weren't wanted in and the men were armed and had a posse? That's where Nehemiah sits, right? Like you know. And so he shows up. He's not wanted there. And so he hangs out for a couple of days and he's like, all right, I gotta see what's going on here. I gotta do some reconnaissance, right? So he gets a couple of people to go with him. They take one donkey and they travel around the town. That's what they're doing. They're checking out what's up with the wall, where they're gonna need to fix things, how things are going, right? And he's just observing the situation. All the while, Nehemiah has not shared his plans at all. He hasn't shared any of his plans with anybody. Nobody knows what he's doing there. It's pretty clear that Sanballat, Tobiah, and I think Geshem, that they don't want him there, but they also don't know why he is there, right? And then he meets with the Jewish leaders and says, hey, this place is a mess. Why don't we get to work? God's on our side. We can do this, right? So you listen to this story, and there's a lot of times that like, okay, so we talked about the hero's journey, and when you go to watch a movie, this is what happens, right? Like you go to the movie theaters. This is very intentional. You walk into a theater. You ever notice in the movie theaters the walls are all covered with cloth? Like, so they're deadening the sound, right? And then you sit down, and it's dim when you start, kind of sets the mood, right? And then as soon as you're supposed to be looking at the big screen, the lights go out. What they're doing is they're trying to get you into a space where you're not distracted at all, and you have the opportunity to kind of suspend reality, right? You forget where you are in the moment, and you engage with the story. There's a lot of times when we read the Bible that doesn't happen. Right? You read the Bible. Let me not say this about you. How about me? There's a lot of times when I read the Bible and I'll be reading a story and I don't engage with it that way, right? There are times that you sit down with the Bible and you read it as a matter of responsibility. I'm supposed to do this to be a good Christian, so I'm going to do it. And you read it and you're like, Sanballat and Tobiah and Nehemiah, and then you finish it and you're like, all right, done. Right? And you don't engage with what the person is going through, with what's happening here. You know, and if we do that with Nehemiah, you miss the moment that happens right here, because this exchange in these 10 verses, it's a huge act of faith. So let's unpack it. Nehemiah shows up. Okay, yeah, he's unwanted. He's unwanted. This is a big deal. These guys have been in charge of the area. They don't want him they don't want the Jews to come back. They have their own space. This is our land now, right? They don't want the walls to be rebuilt. If the walls are rebuilt, then like society for the Jews can be reestablished. A kingdom could be reestablished. We could lose what we have. So they definitely don't want that. And just unpack that for a minute. Like, if you've walked into a room and you have faced opposition there, like how do you react? You know, how do you react? Most of us fall into one or two camps when it comes to that stuff. You have the fighters and you have the runners, right? Like in conflict. So when there's how do I say this without making myself sound like a jerk? I don't mind conflict. Like, I don't mind conflict. It'll suck the life out of me, especially if it lasts long, but I don't mind it. A lot of times in a marriage, you have one party who's a fighter and one party who's a runner. So in my marriage, I'm the fighter, right? So like if Amanda and I have a disagreement, we need to finish it right here. And she's like, no, I need to sleep. And then tomorrow we can talk about it and we'll be civil. And I'm like, no, we need to finish it right here. You see what I'm saying? Y'all have had that fight. Lots of nods, right? And like, so that's the way I am. I'm like, let's do this right now. And even in work, when there's conflicts, it's like, all right, we're gonna finish this. Like this conflict will come to completion. We will not carry this forward. This is going to be over right now. You know, no matter what it costs either of us, we are gonna finish this, right? And like I'm totally that way, fighter. Well, if you're a runner, you just shut down. You meet conflict and you shut down. I'm not saying one's better than the other, right? Because when I fight without thinking, I'm destructive. When I just do it and it's pride-based, that's not good, right? But if you're a runner, you shut down. That's not good either, right? Because now this doesn't work. And those tend to be our reactions to conflict. You walk into a room, you're not wanted. You face this opposition. You have this going on, and it's like, I don't know what to do. And that would be the natural reaction for Nehemiah. He shows up. He's got some people who came with him from the king, but like, this isn't good. And I think a lot of times what happens to us when we think about opposition, when we face opposition, is we allow ourselves to believe that the opposition is proof of God's absence, right? Follow me on this. One of the things that I hear most often from people when they start to doubt their faith is they say if there is a God and he is good, how could there be so much evil? You probably thought this, you probably felt this, right? There is a God and he is good, how could there be so much evil? Well, let's pick this apart for just a second, right? Let's pick apart the bad things in the world, just a little bit. Let's start with natural disasters, right? Because that feels like something that people say that about. When it comes to natural disasters, if you believe in God, you could be tempted to say, well, those are acts of God. God did that. Well, no, natural disasters are a result of the fall. There's no earthquakes in Eden. Edom is another place. There's no earthquakes in Eden. There's no hurricanes in Eden. You don't hear of any of that. The natural disasters, that's the fallenness of this world. We caused that. Our sin took us out of paradise, right? Our sin took us out of paradise and put us into a place where these things happen. That's not God's fault. If you believe the Bible, that's not God's fault. That's our fault, right? Now, I'm not going to go so far as to say that natural disasters happen to especially sinful peoples and all of that. I think sometimes people get crazy with that. As a principle, this stuff happens because the world is fallen, right? Okay, so you have that. Then you just have evil, right? So if we take that, set it aside, we just say that's our fault. Now you just have evil. Well, how could God allow evil to exist? Well, evil exists because of the state of the world and the world being fallen. And evil is not proof that God doesn't exist. Actually, it's proof that he does. If you believe that there is a if you believe that there's a supernatural malevolence in the world, i.e. the devil, then you must also believe that there's a supernatural benevolence in the world, i.e. God. You have to believe this. Why? Because not everything's bad. And if everything's not bad, there must be something supernatural causing the good too. And so we allow ourselves, because we get honestly, we just get intellectually lazy and we're like, bad things happen, so God must not exist. No. Bad things happen. And the fact that there's still good in the midst of the bad proves that he exists. And in the same way, the opposition that we come up against, it's not proof that he's not there. It's when you face opposition and you don't crumble before it, it's proof that he's with you. The thing is not to give in to your natural inclination to always fight or to always run. The thing is to follow him through it. And if we're willing to follow him through it, Nehemiah doesn't do either, if you notice. He doesn't fight. He's got these people that don't want him. He doesn't say, let's go. Now later he does have to fight because he defends himself, but he never goes on offense. He does what God called him to do, and in the face of opposition, he has hope. If we're following Jesus, we can have hope in the face of opposition. It doesn't have to be the end, and it's not proof that he's not with us. The victory on the other side of it is proof that he's always been there. The big thing there is you got to be following him. All right? And to clarify, this will kind of be a common thread throughout this, like to clarify, following Jesus is different than believing in him. There's a lot of people who intellectually believe that there is a God. There's a lot of people who intellectually believe that Jesus is the Son of God. But you have to be following him to have that provision. You have to be, the old school way of saying this is in his will, right? I just don't say it that way because I always hate where that ends up for all, maybe not the adults, but for the, how do you stay in his will? And you feel like you're like chained to like this one place. And if you ever leave this place, you're not in his will. And it's like, man, there's so much more grace in God than that. You got to be following him. The next thing is Nehemiah shows up. I don't think we unpacked this all the way. Nehemiah shows up. Think about this. Okay, he's supposed to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. He's never been to Jerusalem. He's never been to Israel. He grew up in, what was it, Persia. He's never been there. So God gives him the task of rebuilding this wall. This is what he's supposed to be doing. He's got to go to Jerusalem and he's going to rebuild this wall. Okay, there's so many ways that Nehemiah just is not the guy for the job. Because first of all, he's got to go to an unknown land. He's got to go to an unknown land. He's got to rebuild a wall he's never seen before. Oh, and by the way, he's not a builder. Bro spent his whole career doing this. He was cupbearer to the king. He poured the drink. He drank the drink. He gave it to the king. This right here is nice. That's a solid career. That's good, right? That's great. We're happy about it. This is not how you build a wall around a city, right? That's not how you build a wall around a city. He don't know what he's doing. Anybody here want to take on the task of building a wall around Prince Frederick? Yeah, okay, we got one guy. He's pretty confident in his ability with construction and concrete. Like, you get what I'm saying? Like, that's crazy. This is crazy. There's so many just complete unknowns, so many crazy things that could happen. And look, you have to apply wisdom in these scenarios, right? Because there are some times that you could walk into an unknown scenario and be an idiot, right? Like, I'll tell a story. So on Friday, a man and I were going on a date, and when you're young, or dating consists of doing things you want to do, like going to a cool restaurant, spending your whole week's, paycheck on a meal that you can't afford, and thinking that you're awesome. And you just like stare into each other's eyes very deeply. And it's great. And then when you have kids, you go to like Texas Roadhouse, if you're feeling fancy. And you barely look at each other because the kids are screaming. And then after that, you go to Target because you need to pick up wipes because there's too many butts to be wiped. You get what I'm saying? It's not nearly as romantic. So we went to Target. And we show up at Target. And I'm skipping over a detail. I'm the person in my marriage that will be like, hey, I want to get this. And then I go get it, right? And Amanda's like, we need to think about it, we need to plan it, and we're not spending a lot of money. Now, Amanda keeps us alive, and I keep us fat and happy. That's how this works, okay? And so I spring it on her on Friday afternoon. Hey, I want to get a new mattress. I'm sleeping in a ditch right now. Being 280 pounds, sleeping on a mattress, it always turns into a ditch. I don't know if you know this. I should sleep on a plywood board. That's the only way I wouldn't dent it. But I'm like, I'm kind of tired of rolling around in this ditch. I'd like to get a new mattress. And she's like, what? Because I hadn't said anything to, I've been thinking about it for a month or two. I didn't say anything to her about it. I thought she understood. I thought she read my mind. So we go to the mattress store and after dinner, and we walk into the mattress store, and I'm like, yeah, let's look at the mattresses. And like Amanda is so, I'm not buying a mattress tonight, that even the sales lady's like trying to just get back to the desk. Like, because I'm like, oh, you try this out. And she's like, yeah, try it out. And then the lady's like, literally she stands on the other side of the thing talking to us about the beds because Amanda's not buying a mattress tonight. That's not happening, right? So we don't buy a mattress. It's all good. And so we leave, and then we go to Target. But in leaving, I go to back out. I go to back out of my space, and just a minivan goes flying by. You know, and when you're backing out of your spot and you're already halfway out, you kind of expect people to stop for you. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, you know, I'm here. Like, don't hit me in the butt. I'm here. Nah, flying by. And everybody's like, what the heck? And I'm like, I don't know, man. People are dumb. People are dumb, right? So then we get over, I park, and I look over, and the van that had just flew by us had parked near us, and two little 16-year-old girls get out and walk in. And she's like, we're walking in, and she's like, you should say something to them. I'm like, I ain't doing that. I don't know if those 16-year-old girls have like a 250-pound Jack Daddy. I'm not saying nothing. Like, I'm not doing it. You know, she's like, they're going to hit somebody. I'm like, as long as it's not me. Now, on one hand, she's right. It's not safe, and somebody should say something. On the other hand, sometimes it's dumb to walk into unknown that's stupid and not led by God, right? So wisdom has to be applied. But if we're following Jesus, we can walk by faith into the unknown. We can walk by faith into what we don't see. Nehemiah has no idea how this is going to go down. There's no way he could. He's probably got some ideas of what could happen, but he doesn't know. But he walks into it anyway. You know, on the flip side of that, when we're following Jesus, there's a story I heard about that I heard from my dad. So this is about my Pawpaw Gray. And you don't get a lot of Pawpaw Gray stories because he didn't talk much. He was one of them good old boys. The only way to get him talking was to ask him about buildings he had built like 40 years ago, because he was a construction guy. Like, he just didn't talk much. So, but he told this story one time, and I just remembered it. He said he was sitting in the car, and it's raining and foggy. You know those summer thunderstorms, just rain and fog. You can't hardly see. And he sat up towards the front seat, and he said, Daddy, how are you driving? He said, Pawpaw Gray looked at him and he said, boy, you see that line there? And that's how every response from Pawpaw Gray started with boy. Boy, you see that line there? You see that line there? I was like, yeah. So you just keep the headlights between the lines. When you're following Jesus, it's really that simple. You may not know everything that's going on around you. You may not know all the risks. You may not know how bad it's going to be. You may not know how good it's going to be. You may not know if just around the corner there's one of those farm stands that's got really good peaches and ice cream and the pecans with that might be there, or it could be danger. You don't know. But if you're following Jesus, you can walk by faith into the unknown and know that it's going to be okay. Why? Well, This is the Apostle Paul, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, 6 through 8. So we're always confident, even though we know that as long as we live in these bodies, we are not at home with the Lord. For we live by believing and not by seeing. We walk by faith and not by sight. Yes, we are fully confident and would rather be away from these bodies, but for then it will be at home with the Lord. And so what it is you can walk by faith and not by sight. It really don't matter how it turns out. If you're following Jesus, if you live or die, if it's dangerous or if it's safe, it does not matter, because you're walking with Jesus and your future is secured, whether it's here or there. And like a lot of times we hear that and it's like, yeah, that's nice, but I want to live. Yeah, that's nice, but I don't want to die. Yeah, that's nice. But like, listen, it's an article of faith. It is something that is important that you can walk with that level of abandon when you follow him. And look, I got through last service without saying this, but I'm gonna have to say it now. Look, you remember when COVID happened? All of this stuff, they shut everything down, and all the churches close up. Why did the churches close? Because we don't want anybody to get sick and die. Well, if you were to ask me, the real answer probably would have been, I don't want to be the weirdo saying I have faith that it won't happen. I understand, somebody might get mad at me for this, whatever, we can have a conversation later. I understand that there were real health risks, but I also understand a God who is the God of health. And if I had to do that over again, they'd had to lock me up for me to lock the doors. Because it's not about civil disobedience. I'm not standing on, do I think that the right to religious freedom and the right to assembly allows me to do that? Yes, but it's not that. I'm not standing on any governmental thing. I'm not making a political statement. I'm saying I believe in a God who is the God over my body. And when I did not stand on the table and yell and scream for the doors not to be locked, I was wrong. Because when we did that, we signaled to everyone else that there was something to fear. And if I know my future is secured here or it's secured there, I have nothing to fear. And I can walk into the unknown with faith, knowing that my God will take care of me. And good Lord, if I die on a hospital bed all alone, that's fine. That's what he meant to happen. And when I see him, he'll tell me why. We have allowed the fear of death and the fear of pain and the fear of suffering to invade our faith and make it small. We can't do that anymore. Because when we allow the fear of pain and death and suffering to invade our faith and make it small, the faith we have doesn't look any different than the logic that the rest of the world has. I listened to a podcast and the guy said, after COVID, during COVID, we tried to go to the church. They wouldn't let us into church. And I said, why? And the pastor said, well, because we don't want people to die. I'm afraid people will die. And he said, I turned and I looked at my wife and I said, we're never coming back here. And he said, why? Or she said, why? And he said, because that pastor's afraid of death. If they're afraid of death, they don't believe what they think they believe. I was about ready to cry driving down the road. If you're following Jesus, you can walk by faith into the unknown. And you may be like, yeah, but science, yeah, but this, yeah, but that. If you believe in a God who is over all of that, stop butting him and just do what he says. Sorry. Keep going. Verse 18, this kind of jives with it. Then I told them about how the gracious hand of God had been on me and about my conversation with the king. They replied at once, yes, let's rebuild the wall. So they began the good work. So he's trying to encourage them to rebuild the wall. And he turns and he tells them, I spoke to the king and the king had favor with me. And I prayed before that. I'm sure he said this, that it's a diary, all the things, but I'm sure he had to have, like the king had favor on me because I prayed before to God that he would have favor on me. So the king's favor represents God's favor. And if the king's favor represents God's favor, then there's nothing to be afraid of. And ultimately what he's saying here is that if God put me here, then the circumstances just don't matter. If God put me here for his reasons and for his purposes, the circumstances just don't matter. That's what we do. We stack up the circumstances and we try to analyze the situation and we try to come up with the way in, the way out. We try to make sure it's all gonna be good. And like, let me just tell you, for what I did for a job for 5 years, I was a planner. I was a planner for a church of about 2,000 people. And that was pretty much it. They call it executive pastor. That's a real nice spiritual way of saying you plan a lot of stuff. And you sign off on whether people are gonna spend money or not. And it's really not that great, and it's kind of boring. And that's what we did. We planned stuff, and I planned the heck out of things, and I come up with ideas, and I'd be like, we're gonna do this, and God's gonna bless it. We're gonna do this, and God's gonna bless it. And let me tell you, I was wrong more than I was ever right. Because I was worried about all of the circumstances and managing the circumstances rather than bowing my knee to the God who changes them. I taught a leadership class for some up-and-coming pastors, some guys who are going to become pastors, and I was talking with them, and it just happened, but this was one of the healthiest things that ever happened to me. We're talking about the willingness to fail, and I looked at them, and I said, do you have a dollar amount? Have you ever assigned a dollar amount to the failures in your life? Like, make them real, because what we do is we run from failure. We hide from our failures. We don't want to look at our failures. We don't want to think about our failures. I was like, have you ever assigned a dollar amount to the failures in your life? Now, for me, that's pretty easy because I worked with the finance team to manage the money. So the failures in my career were really easy to apply a dollar amount to, and I'm not going to tell you because you won't like me anymore. It was a lot bigger than I wanted it to be. And then I can go back because of the way my memory works. I can apply a dollar amount to the failures, the financial failures in my personal life. It's one of the healthiest things I've ever done because what I realized is that the things that I do in my own strength, I fail at. The things that I plan, I fail at. The things that I cost myself money, I cost God money. I mess things up. I don't fix things. I make them worse because I think that I can manage the circumstances to get the outcome that I want from God. And instead, all we need to do is just go to him. If you're following him, the circumstances just are not important. They just don't matter. They just don't matter at all because he's in charge of them. We started this church down on the water. It keeps saying this church down on the water. I don't know. I guess it's going to be a church. It was supposed to be 8 weeks of a group of people. And hi, guys, because they're going to get the video. It's supposed to be 8 weeks of a group of people that were just going to sit on the water and have church. And like, you got to understand, this is the dumbest setup ever. No offense, love you. It's the dumbest setup ever because you don't do church this way. There's a TV. It's not an impressive TV, right? And then there's like it was a budget TV. Like we spent $500 on the TV. Like, you know what I'm saying? The one in your house is nicer, I'm sure. And then we have a speaker. And when I say a speaker, I mean, it's one of the speakers that you would have like for karaoke. It's a speaker with a stick that has another speaker in it. And that's it. And then there's a microphone. Again, basically karaoke microphone. And then on top of that, they're getting my dumb butt on video. And people are showing up. They're still showing up. They've had 3 chances to stop showing up, and they're still showing up. If I had planned that, I'd have said, that's a dumb idea. We're not doing it. But we prayed, God, we want to be a part of something different. And then that idea came up, so we just followed it, and it's working. It's not how you're supposed to do it. It's just how God wanted to do it. If I'm being honest, I just think we should all say a lot more of that. That's not how I was supposed to do it, but I guess that was how God wanted me to do it. All of this relies on one question. Are you where he wants you to be? If you're where he wants you to be, this is all true. If you're in rebellion against him, none of it's going to work. Because you're going to be doing it all in your own strength. You'll be saying, I have faith. Then you'll be micromanaging everything. You're going to say, I have hope. There's opposition, I have hope. But then you're going to fight or you're going to run. You're going to say the circumstances don't matter. But then they're really going to matter. Why? Because you're not where he wants you to be. You're not submitted to him. It's really a binary situation. You can live your life submitted to him and watch the walls fall in front of you. Or you can live your life in rebellion against him and watch the walls throw up in front of you. Just keep building and the opposition grow. That's it. It's that simple. And I think that's why we have so many Christians who see the faith as a burden Well, it is a burden because you live your life in rebellion against him and expect him to work on your behalf. Submit to him and let him do his job. Stop trying to be God. You're not smart enough. You're not good enough. You're not strong enough. And I don't mean that as an insult. I've tried to be God. And I'm bad at it. And you are too. Are you where he wants you to be? Or are you in rebellion against him? That's it. All right, let's pray. God, just let us follow you. Let us follow you. Let us stop making our own ways and then blaming you when it goes bad. God, every time we make you our scapegoat, I pray that you would convict us. I pray that every time we make you our scapegoat, that you would break our hearts all over again. God, you are not our scapegoat. You are not the thing we blame. You are the thing we praise because you're in control of it all. We have no fear of the circumstances. We have no fear of the opposition. We have no fear of the unknown because we know you and we know you control all of it. Give us faith to live that way. Amen.